So the title, Repeat Offender, my first album came out in 1987. The first single was a song called Don't Mean Nothing. And I started my career at rock radio. Don't Mean Nothing very quickly ascended to #1 on the Billboard rock charts, where it stayed for weeks. Now in 1987, if you turned on the radio, pop radio, for the most part you were going to hear disco, dance music, or like hair bands, like Crew and Poison. And then along comes Don't Mean Nothing, which is this sort of Eagles-influenced, straight-ahead, Southern California vibe rock and roll song with a story. It didn't fit what the radio was playing at all, but it broke through and launched my career. And I became both successful on the charts and on the radio, but also with critics. The critics loved me. The critics thought, finally, I was 23 when my record came out, a young heir to the throne of the Eagles and real music and real rock and roll. And then by the third single, which was Endless Summer Nights, they were already starting to turn on me because they could tell that I was just as interested in singing love songs as I was singing rock songs. And and also I was just getting a little bit too popular. And so the critics really turned on me midway through my first album. And by the time Hold On to the Nights, the fourth and last single from the first album, went to #1 on the pop charts, they just were ruthless, vicious. And at first it's like, that doesn't feel good. But then I started to really kind of like wrap my brain around it. You know, no music critic has ever stopped anybody from buying a record. And it's got to be frustrating to have been a music critic, knowing that what you write, that what you do for a living doesn't matter. That's got to be frustrating. And I think that that's why so many critics, movie and music, especially music critics, are really bitter people. So when we were trying to come up with the title for the second album, this was sort of in the heat of me being the target of the critics. And so people were throwing ideas out left and right. And I just finally one day just went, how about Repeat Offender? And at first, everyone in my camp was like, you can't call it Repeat Offender. I was like, why the fuck not? It's not like they're waiting for me with open arms anyway. They're going to ravage me. They already hate me. I'm going to hand them a gift on a silver platter and call the album Repeat Offender. So we always talked about like if we could find old demos or outtakes from the recording of this album, that we would make it a box set and call it The Complete Offender. The Repeat Offender album cover. I actually thought that I might have the vinyl version of Repeat Offender, and I do somewhere in my garage, but God knows where. What can I say about the cover of Repeat Offender? I don't particularly like it. Never did. And I'm going to tell you the truth. But the first album, imaginatively titled Richard Marx, was the cover of the first album was done by a friend of mine named Nels Israelson. And Nels ended up doing the first album, the Rush Street album, the Paid Vacation album, the Days in Avalon album, my Christmas album, so many covers and so many photo shoots I did with Nels. And I just feel like he's so talented, and I think we did some really cool stuff together over the years. Even though the first album was very successful, my record company at the time, and my manager, I think, they really wanted me to work with this hot, young female photographer named E.J. Camp. And by the way, I really liked working with E.J., and I think she's very talented. So what I don't like about this is not, sorry, Freudian, is not anything to do with her work. It's actually a really interesting composition. We found some old Mexican church out in the desert somewhere, and I think it was her idea to make it sort of, Mexican Santa Fe. The wardrobe, the styling was very whatever. The back cover, same thing. I'm just looking off into the distance. It's so interesting that this is my most successful album because the artwork to me is just, yeah. I do like this picture though because my fluffy mullet was on point that day in that moment. What originally happened was when we picked the location for this, like I said, in the middle of this like deserted town with an old abandoned Mexican church, I had been introduced to what would you call him? He did wardrobe for a lot of entertainers back in those days, and his name shall remain nameless for obvious reasons forthcoming. But he was sort of like getting a lot of work. He would design clothes for people, and so we hired him, and we showed him kind of the location, and he designed clothes for me for this photo shoot that were all kind of in the theme of this sort of Santa Fe thing, but it was like the most cringe Vegas review, so not me, and it cost me so much money to get these clothes. And at the end of the day, I just had to go to my closet and get out some dark jeans and a leather jacket and a t-shirt. And that's what ended up on this package. And I had to do extra gigs this tour to pay for the clothes that I didn't use that he designed for me. But they were just, trust me, they were awful. And it's always interesting how did everybody agree on that? Because we must have shot 200 photos that day. And I did finally, I always got approval. I got the final say. But I remember I wasn't really crazy about this one, and I got talked into it. And I don't know. It just there's no vibe to it to me. Tell me what you think. Am I wrong? Because you would think that maybe 35 years later, you would think that maybe 35 years later, time would actually soften my position on this. And I'd be like, yeah, you know what, actually looking back, it's actually kind of, no, I still don't like it.